26 people have been swapped between Russia and the United States and 5 other countries. The White House has hailed the deal as historic. President Biden has called it a feat of diplomacy. Well, among the 16 people released from custody in Russia is the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, the former US Marine Paul Whelan, and the Russian-American radio journalist Alsu Kumasheva. These are the latest pictures we've had in. They were filmed of prisoners being transported to make their way back to the West. And among the Russians freed from Western jails, Vadim Krasikov, an FSB hitman who brazenly gunned down an opponent of the Kremlin in broad daylight in Berlin. Well, Steve Rosenberg, our Russia editor, has this report from Moscow.
It was a complex operation, planes flying in from east and west. The location had been a closely guarded secret, Ankara Airport, the stage for the largest prisoner swap since the Cold War. It involved 26 people being held in 7 different countries. Among those freed from Russian jails, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, former US Marine Paul Whelan, and US-Russian journalist Alsu Kurmasheva. Released too, prominent Kremlin critics and anti-war campaigners like Vladimir Kara-Murza and human rights campaigner Oleg Orlov. Back to Russia, convicted assassin Vadim Krasikov, identified by a German court as having links to the Russian state, and 9 others the Kremlin wanted back. For Paul Whelan, this ends an ordeal that began more than 5 years ago, when he was arrested in Russia, convicted of spying and sentenced to 16 years in prison. It's a charge he's always fiercely denied. Speaking later from the White House, President Biden gave his reaction.
It says a lot about the United States that we work relentlessly to free Americans who are unjustly held around the world. It also says a lot about us that this deal includes the release of Russian political prisoners. They stood up for democracy and human rights. Their own leaders threw them in prison. The United States helped secure their release as well.
America has repeatedly accused Moscow of jailing US citizens with the aim of trading them for Russians jailed abroad. For the families and friends of Evan Gershkovich, Paul Whelan, and dissidents like Vladimir Kara-Murza, this is a moment to celebrate. But keep in mind, for the Kremlin, it is mission accomplished. It got what it wanted. It got its agents back. For Moscow, the takeaway from all of this will be that hostage diplomacy works. And that means we're likely to see more of it. More prisoners here being used as bargaining chips. And more prison exchanges like this one may be needed to bring them home. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, I've been talking to Paul Beckett, who's assistant editor of the Wall Street Journal, where the journalist and reporter Evan Gershkovich worked. And he's been telling me he and his colleagues are really looking forward to welcoming Evan back home and back to the newsroom.
Smiles of joy, tears of relief, I think, exhausted but jubilant. And that's just us. You know, I can only imagine how Evan feels and how his family is feeling as they await to be reunited when his plane lands.
Tell us, as much as you can, you know, how these negotiations to get him out have transpired in the last few months. Obviously, it's all been done very secretly, but very intensively.
It has done, and there's only so much appropriately that we can see, and most of it we can't. So I think we became aware a few weeks back that there was momentum to get this done. It's obviously been 16 months. And we and so many other people have been trying to create a landscape on which successful negotiations could take place. But we started to feel probably 2 or 3 weeks ago that things were moving in a positive direction. And obviously, great credit to the Biden administration for pulling it off, and also to all the other allied governments, Germany and others, that made it happen.
And there is an account in the Wall Street Journal talking about how Evan's mother Ella arrived for a meeting at the White House with Joe Biden, and she was told to bring her husband and daughter and not to tell anybody that they were going to go there.
Yes, the administration has been in touch with them and trying to prepare them for this moment. I think everybody though thought there was always something that could go wrong. So there wasn't a moment until we knew that he was out of Russian custody, had his feet on the tarmac in Ankara, when we said, "Okay, it's done."
The Russians accused him of spying, of espionage. What has been your view of those allegations against your reporter?
It's a drivel, utter drivel. And we've known that for 60 months. I think the Russians really have known that for 60 months, and they wanted to use Evan for their own purposes and in a geopolitical chess game with the United States and others. So obviously he's just a reporter for the Wall Street Journal who was doing his job in Yekaterinburg, outside, quite a long way from Moscow, when they grabbed him. So all of the legal process against him was bogus. The accusations were false. And we look forward to, at some point when he's ready, welcoming him back to the newsroom.
And when he was incarcerated, when he was first accused, there must have been huge shock at your organisation and also for his family.
Yeah, real fist in the gut, for a long time. So it was, you just never want that to happen to your colleague. We never wanted it to happen to any of the other folks who came out today. And, we've tried to stand with him and his family for the last year. They've been absolutely remarkable. And the fact that in addition to Evan, you have 16 other families or 15 other families that are being reunited today is a wonderful moment.
Was there any particular thing that was the key to getting him out? We were just talking there with our correspondent in Berlin about Vadim Kasikov, that hitman who we gather that President Putin was particularly keen to get released.
Yeah, and obviously the Germans stepped up massively with the US and with the other governments. You saw people, Russians going back to Russia from Poland and Norway and Slovenia as well. So it was a really big Allied effort. It was clear that Krasikov was the key to that. And it was clear that that's who the Russians wanted. And Putin made that, all but said his name, really, in January. So, that has always been the focus. But we thought there was a window this summer that might get done. And then we were worried that it really wouldn't get done because it was the US campaign, potentially a new administration. So it's just massive relief that here we are. It's over. Is
there a danger, though, that, Putin and the Kremlin have seen that they can arrest people in Russia, put them in jail, and then get people like Krasikov, hitmen who've been jailed for murder, get them released in return? In other words, the same thing might happen again. They might pick up more Westerners, more Americans, put them in jail, and then hope to trade them.
So I don't think anybody likes these deals. I don't think the US government likes the deal. It was the predictable outcome for the extraordinary cynicism that Russia displayed in taking Evan and all the others who were released from prison today. So that is how this works until, and I know this is a top priority for US and allied governments, and it will be even more so now that this big swap has been undertaken, is to find a way to remove the incentive for Russia and other countries who do this from ever doing it again in the future. So that's something I think we will see going forward. And there's already been talk of the US and other countries forming a kind of NATO common defense or mutual defense on arbitrary detention, which is what this is. So I think you'll see a lot more focus on that going forward, because there are certainly, from the people who are taken, from their point of view, the minute they're taken, this hostile country wins.
Well, that was Paul Beckett, Wall Street Journal assistant editor, talking to me a little earlier. And we can speak now to Arkady Ostrovsky, who's Russia editor at The Economist. Thank you very much for being with us. Paul Beckett was just saying no one likes these sort of deals, but I wonder if President Putin actually does like them. He's an old KGB man. This is a bit like the Cold War, isn't it? This sort of prisoner swap. and he's got quite a lot out of this deal.
No, you're absolutely right. I think he does probably like it, and it reminds him of his youth at the KGB. Like much of what he does, this is a kind of a cosplay of that era of the Cold War. And given that he thinks, I think that he is fighting this existential war against the West and the liberal order, which he blames for bringing down the Soviet Union, that this is not just a war in Ukraine, this is a war against the West, replay of that, revival and revision of the Cold War. I think this fits into that scenario extremely well for him. And he got back, as I said, he got back his assassin, Krasikov, and some of the illegals. And this is important for a it's not just a kind of a Soviet style. It's not a Soviet style state, in fact, at all. But it's important for a mafia-like state, or for a mafia-like system of running, doing business in Russia, because it shows to those who might follow Krasikov that he will stand by them. That this ensures loyalty of security services, and the loyalty of security services is absolutely vital for Putin.
Just on a wider point, some people have speculated that the fact that Russia was prepared to negotiate all of this may mean that it's prepared to negotiate with Ukraine. Do you think there's any truth to that? Do you see any indications that there might be some opening of diplomatic pathways on that?
Well, I think there's always been openings, and I think he is signaling that he is still saying that he can negotiate, but the negotiations Putin feels, and certainly at the moment when the Russian troops are advancing, should be on his term. I mean, effectively, he's asking for capitulation. I wouldn't link the exchange of prisoners with that. I wouldn't read more into that. And I think what's important here is not just what's in it for Vladimir Putin. I think something quite extraordinary has taken place this afternoon, which we're not paying enough attention to, which is, what it means for the West, what this step of getting not just Evan, who is a brilliant journalist, a brave, reporter, wonderful colleague, but what it means to get Russian political prisoners and the prisoners of conscience out of Russia. And this is not, this is something we have not seen since the end of the Cold War, when the West, frankly, has been, as you know, been extremely transactional. End of history, put ideology behind us, and suddenly this is the West. I think to everybody's surprise and to my, certainly to my delight, Germany and the US. And the Western countries say, no, we actually do care about people who are prisoners of conscience, because we understand, or hopefully, I hope that is indeed what this means, is that we understand that human rights inside Russia, and the political opposition inside Russia is not a matter of just charity. It's the matter of international security. And that was a link which was absolutely explicit in all the negotiations over nuclear arms treaties, in the 70s and the 80s, that basically, if you can make Russia respect, if you could make the Soviet Union pay attention to human rights, that is your best security, because a country that will violate its own people and violate their boundaries and their rights will certainly violate sooner or later, particularly when armed with nukes, will violate international borders. And that is the link that had been lost. And I think the reason Putin had been able to prosecute this war is partly this kind of shrugging of the shoulders and cynicism, saying, yeah, but human rights is kind of stuff from the 80s. It's not. And I think in seeing the American citizens, the German citizens included, being part of the same exchange as Vladimir Kara-Murza and Ilya Yashin. And sadly, we should remember that the person who also should have been part of that exchange is is of course Alexei Navalny,
Yeah.
who been killed in
Indeed.
jail before that exchange could happen. So I think this is really, really important, that the war in Ukraine, the war against the West, all the things that the British Army generals are warning are absolutely linked to what's happening inside Russia.
Okay. All right. Good to get your thoughts and analysis. Thank you so much, Arkady Ostrowski, Russia editor at The Economist.